So this is another dry run for my performance. That'll be on Friday. It's Wednesday today, and I'm going to try and remember as many of the jokes as possible. And I need a better way of figuring out how to put the jokes in. But anyway, I've got the full flow of the thing, I think, and I'm just going to go right from the top. And I remember the first joke, which is the Buddha. The Buddha says that we become the thing that we most resist. And in my case, I think that means I must have been pushing very hard against a fat Yorkshireman. And that's what I am. I'm a fat Yorkshireman. And in this introduction, I'm going to answer a bunch of questions. Why me? Why should I be telling you this? Why you? Why should you be listening? Why this? Why am I telling you this? And why now? And also, I think I might add in what's at stake. So, if you don't get it right, what happens? Which is kind of also very important. So, why me? Well, the title of this talk is, this show is The Biscuit Tin and the Biscuit, and it's about the difference between a description of something and the reality, like having an idea to do something and the reality of doing something. And there are a couple of reasons why I think I'm qualified to talk about this. One is that I've spent most of my kind of adult life, certainly since I was a moody teenager, kind of fantasizing about the idea of writing a book. And then recently I wrote a book, and then even more recently, in the last few days, I found a publisher for that book. So that's an extremely elongated version of having an idea for something and then making it happen. Another reason is because I'm in my day job, I'm a project manager, and what that is really is just helping people take their ideas and turn them into reality, and that's, in my experience, an extremely involved and emotionally difficult process. So those are two reasons. And then a third reason, I think, is because I'm a human being, and last time I checked, and human beings try and do things. Some of those things they manage to do, some of those things they don't manage to do. Human beings trying to be creative sometimes they're just trying to do things that they've never done before. There's a first time for everything. And there are kind of some struggles involved in that I think I've got just a tiny little bit of insight about. And so why you? Why should you be interested in listening to anything that I've got to say? Well, again, I think, on summary inspection, you all seem to be human beings. And so, if you are human beings, some of the things that I'll be talking about, you have experience of. So, I'm talking about creativity, the fancy C word, but I'm also really talking about doing anything. And I'm sure some of you have tried to do some things, and some of those things have been successful, and some of those things really haven't, and some of those things you've just kind of given up halfway through. And I'm going to talk about all of those things. So that's why you. And why this? Well, what I'm going to talk about is basically something that I realised as a result of writing the last book that I wrote, which is called Delivering the Impossible, which is mainly about project management. It's a book written about project management by somebody who's got a philosophy degree. 2-1. Very proud of it. And the thing about what I realised was that there's this huge difference between ideas and reality. In fact, what was happening was I was reading a book about maths, because that's how I keep myself busy. And in this book, they were talking about the fact that there's a difference between numbers and descriptions of numbers, that descriptions of numbers aren't made of the same thing as numbers. And this kind of dawned on me. This is kind of a realization that yes, of course, like descriptions of things and things are very different. And going on from that, what I realized is, well, essentially I tend to think about things in terms of food, but I started to realize that this business of like the difference between a biscuit tin, which is a description of a biscuit, and the actual biscuit itself, there's just so much emotion that kind of happens from trying to kind of turn something that's a description into a reality. And if you think about, like, an easy way of thinking about this is the Great British Bake Off. What happens in the Great British Bake Off is, yeah, I know sometimes it's a bit more fancy than this, but essentially they make biscuits, and then somebody comes around and then passes comment on their biscuits. That's the entire TV show. And you've got to ask, like, how could that ever be something that would be drama and entertainment? And the reason is because in just that simple act of trying to make something as simple as a biscuit, lots and lots of things can go wrong. And when those things go wrong, people respond to them going wrong emotionally. And then this is the thing that I kind of realized. They respond to things going wrong emotionally, but then also they have to respond to their response. So one of the things that you see a lot in the British Bake Off is you see people trying to show that they're not disappointed, or trying to deal with the fact that they've been really successful when they didn't expect to be successful. So you see people trying to deal with their emotions. And I've kind of wandered off slightly, so I haven't gone on to the kind of the final question, which is why now? Why am I talking about this now? And I think, like, one kind of really obvious answer is this is always an interesting topic. How you deal with doing things, how you can possibly make sure that you're more successful when you do things, that you're being creative, how you can avoid giving up into situations where maybe you shouldn't give up. That's always going to be an interesting topic of conversation. But maybe in a world where we've got AI and stuff, and there's this idea kind of floating around that maybe everything can just be created by machines now, and we don't have to be creative, we don't have to do anything. Maybe it's even more important to have kind of an idea on this, to kind of have an idea about what we're doing things for, and also kind of understand when we do something, what do we expect to happen? What's going to happen when we do things? How are we going to feel? How are we going to feel about what we feel? So that's the kind of introduction that kind of bled into kind of my main point, which is basically that I started to write this book, Delivering the Impossible. And one of the things that I realized in there was that when people are trying to do projects, they become completely obsessed. Well, there's a bunch of things that happen. One is that they become completely obsessed with exact match. They become completely obsessed with the idea of delivering exactly what they said they were going to do. And that's kind of problematic for a bunch of reasons. One is because the description and the reality are made of different stuff. So you don't, they're not the same. A description of something and the thing aren't the same. And so kind of agonizing over showing that they are the same is extremely difficult. Another thing is that when you start to do things, you encounter problems, you encounter reasons why your description isn't going to work, or you just encounter the world is made of different stuff, and the stuff in the world is like changes at a different rate. There's all sorts of complications. And then what I realized was that a lot of what I'm dealing with in project management is the emotions that people feel in this kind of process between a description and a reality. And because of those emotions, it's kind of moving on to the kind of second idea that I have. The second idea that I have is that I'd read a book by a woman called Ali Russell Hochschild, and in that book she talks about something called emotional labour. Now, when I talk, this is a joke that I remember thinking of, when I talk about emotional labour, I'm not talking about the situation that happened when I was born, when red-haired little baby born to a woman with brown hair, which kind of really upset the nurses, and they kind of warned my mother that she'd given baby to a ginger-haired boy, which is fine because my dad was ginger-haired, but I don't think the nurses still liked it. When I came back to the same hospital, this is in Yorkshire, deepest, darkest Yorkshire, when I came back to the same hospital 13 years later and had an appendectomy, the nurses were saying, we don't like gingers, they bleed. If you had a patient that didn't bleed, that'd be weirder, wouldn't it? Anyway, so I digress. So yes, emotional labour. What is emotional labour? Emotional labour is the work that you have to do on your emotions. And the examples that Ali Russell Hochschild is talking about in our book are the kind of people who work in customer service industries, particularly, that they have to be cheerful and pleasant. They have to be non-confrontational, and probably a lot of the time when they're working, they don't want to be cheerful and pleasant, and they do want to be confrontational, and so that's kind of effort that they have to do. They have to try and be pleasant with customers. They have to try not to start fights with customers, and there's also a lot of this in project management. And I have to say, this is not an aspect of project management that I'm terrifically good at. Doing the emotional work of dealing with customers, asking for things that are impossible, or taking a telling off from customers because things aren't going the way they expect. I don't particularly enjoy that, but it is work, and this is a crucial kind of insight for me into why so many people struggle to create things, but also struggle to do things. Because when you do things, then things go wrong. Now, this is an extra bit that I'm going to add in here that I haven't talked about before, but this is another realization by me. I was reading another book. I read a lot of books, and this book was a book about kind of how to use language, how to use the way that you think about things to be more successful. And one of the things that it was talking about in this book was you have to understand the difference between ideas and reality. So it's very much in the same kind of area as the biscuit tin and the biscuit. And there's an exercise in that book which basically said, well, you know, and you can all play along while we're doing this. You think of something that you did yesterday, and think of something that you could have done yesterday but didn't do. Now, what's really important here is the thing that you could have done that you didn't do, it needs to be of the same kind of level of ordinariness. So kind of like, if one of them is that you went to the gym, and that's the thing you did do, the other thing shouldn't be I flew by jetpack once around the world or something, right? So, you know, kind of, they should be of the same level of ordinariness. And so then, when you've got these two things in your mind, try and look at what the difference is between them. How do you know that one of them happened and the other one didn't happen? Now, and at this point, like if I'm doing the show and I have an audience, I'll take some feedback from the audience of things that they've said that and how they know the difference between the two. But this is food based again. This is how I knew that there was a difference between the two, and it's because I thought, well, you know, what's something that happened to me today that really happened? Chicken soup for lunch. What's something that could have happened to me today that didn't happen? I could have had a bacon sandwich for lunch. I like bacon sandwiches, but I try and restrict how many of them I have. And then I thought, well, what's the difference between these two things? What's the difference between these two things? And what I realised was, one big difference is that I spilt some of the chicken soup on my shirt. And this was a big revelation for me. And it's one that I've kind of used a lot as comfort when I'm doing project management, and also like as comfort when I'm actually trying to make things happen, like my book at the moment, is that when things actually happen, things go wrong. So one of the ways, and then you can turn this around the other way around, if you can say corollary, then you can say that this is the corollary. The corollary is that one of the ways that you know something's happening is that things are going wrong. And so this is kind of really important. But of course, what happens when things go wrong? You see all these kind of inspirational posts online saying that, you know, the only thing that you can control about what's happening to you is how you feel about it. But you can't really do that in lots and lots of cases. When things happen, you respond to them in emotional ways. You don't really have much control over those instant emotions. You can maybe do some extra work and figure out like a better way of responding after a while. But those immediate emotions, there isn't really much, I don't think, you can do about them. And so dealing with those immediate emotions, then, if you are going to do something else, if you are going to come up with some better ways of thinking about those emotions, that's all work. And so this is something that I hadn't really twigged, and I don't think anybody else had told me about. And like, you know, when people talk about hard work, they don't really talk about this, which is that yes, if you're going to do something, like if you're going to be creative or you're going to do something new, then the work will come, and it might not come in the form that you expected it to do. It might not come in the form of like just working really long hours or doing lots of repetitions. The work will come in the form of emotions, like Ali Rush or Hochschild, and like pretending to be nice when you're a waitress. Incidentally, apparently the people who do best at being waitresses or waiters are the people who come up with a way of, this is what researchers found, they come up with a way of genuinely feeling good about what they're doing rather than faking feeling good. But of course, like, maybe coming up with a way of feeling good about it, that's work as well, right? So basically, when you try and do something creative, what you're doing is you're handing yourself lots of work. And this kind of like was another revelation to me, because what I realized was, well, that explains why so many of the people that I work with on projects get very upset, because the whole business of like doing the project means it's work for them, and maybe work that they weren't expecting, unexpected emotional work, embarrassment, fear, rage. Now let's see if I can remember all of the emotions. This is a good point to think about all of those emotions. So there are apparently 6 universal emotions, and one of the good things about having an audience, if I ever had an audience, is that I'd be able to ask them to help me. So I think there's fear, anger, surprise, disgust, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, disgust, sadness, and then there's another one. I can always only remember 5. But one of the interesting things about that is that only one of those is pleasant emotion. All of the others are kind of like negative things that we feel, and you know, quite often in projects or in like doing creative things or whatever, we feel all of these things. And this kind of like explains really, really clearly to me why so many people start to do things and then give up. And I bet some of you have started to do things and then given up. And I'm wondering if you think that kind of one of the reasons you've given up is because you had unexpected emotions and you didn't have any good way of dealing with them. And so I'm just gonna, at this point, I'm gonna ask the audience this. And so the thing is that to get to the next stage with this, I had to have two separate realizations. And one was the different ways that people deal with this. So one of the ways that people deal with this is kind of hyperactivity. So kind of like being a workaholic. So like just working really, 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 really hard. Another way that I've seen quite a lot in projects is it's really kind of subtle, but it's something called agreed activity. So kind of when I lived in North London, I did an improvised theatre course. I think like there's some kind of rule that you have to do one. And so I did several, and I enjoyed it greatly. And then I read another book, about improvised theatre by a chap called Keith Johnston. And he talked about something. He gives this example of you've got 4 improvisers on stage, and they ask for a situation. And somebody says, the deck of a ship, the deck of a sailing ship. And so you got these improvisers on stage, and one of them puts a mimed telescope to their eye, and they say, oh look, a pirate ship. Now, in improvisation terms, this is what's called an offer. This is basically like somebody trying to take the story in a particular direction. And one of the things that they teach you in improvisation is to try not to block other people's offers. So if somebody looks through a telescope and says, oh look, that's a pirate ship, what you shouldn't do, and this is a terrible trait of people when they start doing improvisation, is mime your own telescope and say, no, it's not a pirate ship, it's a peddler, or something like that, right? So one of the things that they try and do in improvisation is to encourage you, if you're one of the improvisers on the stage, to accept whatever the offer is. Now, but there is another very much more subtle way of kind of ruining the scene, because now you've put the idea of the pirate ship in the audience's mind. The audience wants to go. They want to go see that pirate ship, right? They want to see a pirate, you know. And there's a conventional way that a pirate is dressed. So, like, you know, the parrot on the shoulder, one leg with a replacement wooden leg and one eye. It's kind of like the story behind that is, like, you know, a particularly a raid on a particularly aggressive pet shop, followed by a visit to an antique shop. But that's what the audience want to see, right? So, like, essentially the scene's on rails from that point. But one of the things that people might want to do is, one of the things that people might do in response, one of the things the improvisers might do in response, is to say something like, let's clean the decks. Now, this doesn't move the story forward. It doesn't completely block the suggestion of the pirate ship, but it doesn't move the story forward at all. But what it does do is it gives everybody something to do which is safe. It's not moving the story forward, but it is safe. And Keith Johnson, in his book, he calls this agreed activity. Now, what this is like, this is something that looks like you're doing something, but you're not actually moving forward at all. And so the interesting thing is that kind of all of these things, like giving up is obviously giving up, but hyperactivity and or perfectionism or kind of agreed activity, these are all kind of other ways of giving up. And what I was kind of trying to think of was, is there any way of moving forward that isn't this kind of giving up? And before I kind of move on to that, which is a kind of solution that I've got, that I'm proposing, I want to kind of just talk a little bit about stories and whether stories are kind of helping or hindering in this whole process. So there's another chap who wrote a book called Joseph Campbell, and he wrote a book called A Hero with 1,000 Faces. And the basic idea of a hero with 1,000 faces is that there's essentially one story, or one myth, and he has to bend an awful lot of things to make it so that there's only one myth. But like, if I tell you some things about this myth, you'll recognize it. So, you know, first of all, there's somebody who's on a very quiet planet / village in a shire who's called something like Luke Baggins or Frodo Skywalker, and while they're living in this nice quiet life, some old dude appears basically and says, "You're the chosen one, you have to come and help me do this thing that's really important." And of course the person who's living in this quiet village doesn't want to do that. They don't want to do the thing, and but then kind of like somehow they're persuaded, and then off they go on their adventures, and they have members of their gang who go with them, and some of those people are amusing, and some of those people turn out to be treacherous and deceptive, and they all go on and have adventures and battles, and the ethics of killing people is never really questioned, and then they come back at the end to somewhere they get medals, or they're kind of rewarded, and that's the arc of a story. And so part of the reason I think that we struggle so much with really doing things is we kind of get that there'll be this bit in the middle that is going to be full of struggles and challenges, but we also kind of expect that we will get through that. We don't think that what goes on in that challenge will be so unexpected, or we'll be struggle to deal with it so much that we just kind of give up, or we come up with a way of an excuse saying, well, you know, once I've polished this particular thing, you know, once I've polished my manuscript to the absolute nth degree, then I'll submit it to the publishers. Or the trouble with me is I'm a perfectionist. Or, well, yeah, I'm just doing this, I'm just loosely writing things every week, but I'm not really putting them together into anything that you could call a book or whatever. Like, so people come up with all these different ways of avoiding moving forward. And there aren't really any stories. Actually, oh God, I'm having a realization. I didn't want to have one of those this near to actually doing a show. I think there are stories like that, actually. And those stories are called sitcoms. But I'm not going to develop that too much. But so the creative, the creative thing that needs to happen here is you need to find some way to move forward. Now, I read this book, and I really liked this book. And in this book was a suggestion of how to move forward. And when I read the book, I thought, oh yeah, I'll do that. And then I would say maybe 10 years later, I read the book again, and I hadn't really taken on board its advice. And I was still really enthusiastic about it. And I thought, yeah, definitely, I'll do that. And then lo and behold, I think like another 5 years later, I was reading it again. And I was thinking, oh, hang on a minute. Every time I read this book, I think this is really good advice, but I never get anywhere with it. And then I had another realization, which is that you can't just kind of say to yourself, oh, well, you know, if you read a book by a marathon runner or something, you can't just go, oh, well, then I'll run a marathon. You have to actually do some do some training, and you have to get from where you are to where you want to be. That's kind of how these things work. And so I'm going to just do a demonstration here of what I mean. And this is a demonstration I do when I'm doing project management training, but it works for all sorts of things. And what I do is, I can describe it to you here. What I do here is I step up and down as many times as I can in 30 seconds off of a chair, and I explain the notion of power. And my power is normally about 13 stand up and downs off of chairs, and at the end of it I'll be out of breath. I'll be putting my shoes back on because I don't want to step on the chair. But if I wanted to increase it, I'd have to practice, and I can only really do that, step up and down off the chair, etc., a couple of times a day. I don't even want to do it twice, really, but kind of, and then that's enough. And this is kind of what I was realizing with this book, and what this book suggested was something that I think is absolutely fascinating. But what I think I realize is you have to kind of figure out what your capability of doing that is. You can't just go, right, I'll do that then. So what this book talks about is something called second circle. Now, there are actually 3 circles, and I talk about them in an odd order. I talk about them 3, 1, 2. So the third circle is basically modes of communication. Going past a very, very loud ice cream van here now. So these are modes of communication, and third circle is the shouty communication. It's basically when you're shouting at people, you're barking at people, you're telling them stuff, you're not listening. And so that kind of communication is third circle communication. And we get that a lot, don't we? We get that in politicians, we get that in social media. We get yelled at a lot by social media. We yell at social media a lot. And so that's one kind of communication. First circle communication is kind of opposite of that, which is it's kind of talking to yourself and not talking at all, or kind of like nodding and accepting communication from other people, but not really doing any communicating yourself. And that's something we see a lot. We see people acquiescing, not wanting to argue, not wanting to get involved in a discussion. And then second circle communication is being willing to get involved in a discussion, and it is willing to be changed. This is something that people talk about a lot with improvisation, that the way to make improvisation work, the way to make it entertaining for people to watch, is to be changed by new information. When new things happen, to be changed by them. And so this is the kind of thing that, like, when I read it, I thought, oh yeah, I'll do that. But of course, the thing is, being actually willing to be involved in a discussion with people is kind of exhausting. And I hadn't kind of thought about that when I first kind of said, oh yeah, I'll do that. And so, for example, in situations where you have to be in second circle, you have to be alert to everything around you all the time, and kind of like you might have to respond in different ways, and also kind of like listen to what's going on. These are kind of situations that in this book Presence by Patsy Rodenberg, she compares to things like being in prison, that you have to be always aware of what's going on around you, or like maybe being on a first date, in prison. Those kinds of things are where you have to be in like second circle the whole time, and that'd be exhausting. So I kind of fell into, by accident, some kind of second circle discussions, and in 2 areas of my life. One was in work. I realised that when I'm doing the project management, there's a lot of shouting and posturing, and there's a lot of kind of basically ignoring what other people are telling you and doing your own thing. But every now and again, you manage to get some actual useful communication where people tell you things and you change your mind as a result of what they've told you, or you tell people things and they change their mind as a result of what you've told them. And again, like kind of life is just too exhausting for that to always be the way that things are happening. And what you're looking for is kind of particular opportunities, looking to structure opportunities within your kind of working relationships where you can have those kinds of discussions. And then, curiously, something similar I realised was going on with my writing. That what I was really struggling with my writing all these years that I've been trying to write something is editing. That I was kind of fine, like kind of brain dumping things and kind of writing, and I would set myself, kind of like ridiculous perfectionist, workaholic type things, like, oh, I'm gonna write 1,000 words a day, and then after 70 days I'll have a novel, that kind of thing. But what I wasn't doing is I couldn't bear to do was to go back and edit stuff. And a couple of things have happened recently that have kind of made me improve that. One of them is doing things like this, just talking at myself, which, like you might say, that's not much of a communicative strategy, but it really, really helps with editing. And another one is having somebody who's willing to read everything that I write, which is, so basically I started telling people that I was writing this book, and then somebody contacted me and said, is it okay, I'm writing a book as well, is it okay if we swap passages with each other? So yeah, we started doing that, and I found that hugely, hugely helpful. And what I realised was that by doing these two things, I've started to kind of end up in kind of an actual discussion. This sounds like something out of an undergraduate textbook, a discussion with the text. But that's it. I've kind of like having this kind of toing and froing with my writing, and this gives me a clue, I think, to something that you need to be doing. These two things, remember, jumping up and down off the chair, and this idea of having of having communication, this kind of second circle communication. I think if you want to move forward and get anything done, then you have to do those two things. And you can only really do those two things if you understand that what happens when you do things is that you experience negative emotions. So kind of one of my friends was saying, I wrote this, the guy who reads my writing, he was saying, yeah, okay, that sounds good, but like kind of what are some examples of that? And he was talking about like trying to learn to play squash and then playing somebody who was like county level or something, was like pretty good at squash, and he thought he was doing pretty well against him, and then he realised that this guy was playing with the wrong hand just to kind of give him a chance. And an example that I had was that I'm trying to learn Greek. My wife's Greek. I've been trying to learn Greek 30 years, but kind of like I was devoted slightly more time and attention to it recently, and I sat an exam, and in that exam I failed the exam, but that wasn't the humiliation. The humiliation was that when I went to the exam, so like a lot of children of Greek people in London, there is actually a full-time Greek school, but they also send their children to Greek school at the weekend to learn Greek, and the exam took place in one of these schools, and so most of the tables and chairs in there were small. And so I found myself like not exactly with my knees around my ears, but my knees kind of like higher up than I would really want them to be, and kind of like just rubbing under the table. And I think there weren't many adults doing this B1 Greek, and there were a bunch of kind of 13, 14-year-old boys. You know, they just got to the point where they started to spurt up, and so I saw that like the invigilators in the corner were having a discussion and gesturing towards some of these taller boys, and so they broke out some of the bigger desks and the bigger chairs, and they gave them to these boys. They didn't give me a big boy chair, didn't give me a big boy table, and this is the kind of humiliation that you have, maybe not directly related to the thing that you're trying to do, but like just pushing yourself into some unusual circumstances. I think like next time I do a Greek exam, and I will do another Greek exam, and I will pass it at one point, I'm going to ask for a big boy chair and a big boy table. I'm going to remember to do that. But anyway, so there are these kind of humiliations, is this emotional work. And so what you need to do is you need to understand that you're in kind of discussion with this. You can shout and scream at it, but it's not going to help you. You can just kind of like melt into yourself and complain about it and then never do anything about it. Or you can ask for a big boy table and a big boy chair. And this is kind of trying to find yourself a way of being in some kind of dialogue with in kind of like second dialogue with the thing that you want to do. And also the other thing is to actually understand what would be a reasonable amount of progress. Yes, you can increase the number of times that you can step up and down off of the chair, and that can be your kind of power, your ability to write a novel, your ability to dance, your ability to play music, whatever it is. But you know, you can only start from where you are. You can't just double how many times you can step up and down off the chair. You can't double the quality of the things you write. You can't just get twice as good at playing a musical instrument. It just doesn't work like that. So it's finding a kind of sustainable way through this, and also understanding that at various points along the way you're not going to like it. And that kind of account of what's going on when you're doing things and creating things, I don't think I've really found. I think I'm doing something slightly original here, but maybe I'm not. Anyway, this is my experience. But what I'm going to leave you with is a way of moving on to the next stage. And this is something else that people don't tell you. And this is kind of a cure. This is a cure for perfectionism. This is a cure for agreed activity. And it's a way of kind of getting into some new area where you're in dialogue of what you're doing. And this is another realization that I had, this is another realization I had in relation to project management, which is sooner or later somebody has to say fuck it. You can't reason yourself into doing whatever the next step is that you're scared of. You can't know what all of the things are that might happen, the benefits and the disadvantages of it. You can't know that you're going to be made to sit on a little boy chair, or humiliated by somebody playing with his left hand. You just have to go for it. And so this is influenced heavily by a chap called Richard Bandler. If you look him up online, you know he's kind of complete rogue and charlatan. But I find this this particular activity extremely useful. So what you do is you start off with something that you want to do that you're not doing, again, the next step in the process that you're not doing, and you start to feel the impatience. You start to feel the frustration, the hesitation. You start to feel the hesitation, like when you get up to. So it's hesitation, frustration, impatience. So like when you imagine, kind of like when you come to think about doing this thing, that you hesitate, that you kind of don't do it. And I want you to put a number on what your kind of like level of that kind of feeling of hesitation is. And then I want you to kind of make it higher and higher and higher. So like if that number is 6, then like I've got a dial here, and then if I turn it to 7, so you like kind of, you're really kind of reining up and like not wanting to do this thing. And then if I turn it to 8, and you're kind of like, if you're like a horse refusing a fence, so you're kind of like rearing up and like not wanting to do this thing. If I turn it up to 9, kind of like, kind of you're neighing and screaming, refusing to do this thing, you're hesitating. What is that thing that you want to do, but you can find yourself now powerfully hesitating? And then I'm going to turn that up to 10, so you've got the maximum amount of hesitation. And then I'm going to just move this hesitation into frustration. So you're not doing this thing, you're kind of maximally hesitating, you're not doing it, and so you're feeling powerfully frustrated. And again, how frustrated are you feeling? Is it a 6? Is it a 5? Start to ramp up that level of frustration, so you're getting more and more frustrated that you're not doing this thing that you want to do. And then if I kind of turn the knob again, if it's 7, if it's 8, you're so frustrated. And then like if I turn the knob from 8 to 9, you're kind of really, really powerfully frustrated that you're not doing this thing that will be the next step in kind of whatever it is, in music, in your career, whatever it is, the next thing. And then I turn it up again to 10, so you're just maximally frustrated. And then when you're maximally frustrated, I want you to start to feel impatience. You've just had it. You just had it with not doing this thing that you know that you want to do is be the next step. So why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you doing this thing? And again, like, going to start with a 5, ramp it up to 6. Your patience levels at a 6, ramp it up to 7. Your patience levels at a 7, ramp it up to 8. You're getting really, really impatient now. Why can't you do this thing that you want to do? Ramp it up to 9. And then finally up to 10. You've just had it. And at that point, I just want you to just go, fuck it, I'm going to do this thing. And if you want to shout fuck it really loudly, then that will really bewilder the people who are waiting for the next show. So are we ready? 1, 2, 3, fuck it. Right. That's the end of the show. Go off and do that thing. It is the next thing that you need to do. And that's it. That's the show.